Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be with the crew this morning. And I think if I were to sort of describe what Michael and I are going to chat about this morning is really this notion we've talked a lot about the last couple of days about data and analytics. And when you think of a traditional brand funnel and moving consumers through that brand funnel, whether you describe it as sort of reach, engage, close, feel, think, do, how do you get people to go from consideration to action? I think the pure play digital guys have done a great job of claiming credit for that bottom of the funnel attribution, right? That final touch point. And the premise that we're going to chat a little bit about today is how do we begin to provide that level of performance measurement, digital-like ROI measurement in the TV world? Our perspective is that people aren't born with the notion of search Volvo XC70 in their medulla oblongata. They don't come into the world with the idea of thinking to search for that. That search is really driven by the brand building at the top of the funnel, and how do you drive brand in world-class content down and push down through that funnel. So what we're going to chat a little bit about today is how we can begin to bring and introduce that digital-like accountability performance measurement into the TV world. We're going to do so in the backdrop of VOD and Comcast partnership with Group M and their advanced advertising team, led by Mike, the Modi media team, and really kind of walk you through a couple of case studies of exactly how we design and execute architecture in this fashion. So when we start with this idea of it all beginning with data, Comcast in the States, we've got about 22 million customers, right? 22 million subscribing households. And we have a name, address, subscriber file for all 22 million of those subscribers because we send a bill to them every month. So what we've done is build a fairly robust database. Think of it in my analog mind as a giant Excel spreadsheet of 22 million rows of our name, address, subscriber file. And we either append customer data to that file in one of two ways. It could be first-party client data, so American Express, a Group M client, they know their Amex Gold Card household or their Green Card customer. How do we marry that subscriber file to our customer file in an anonymous, aggregated, privacy-compliant manner? I'm compelled to, I don't know if we have lawyers in the room, but I'm compelled to say that, anonymous, aggregated, privacy-compliant.
You say that a lot.
I do that. I bolt upright in bed every night, actually, and say that. So the idea is, how do we do that with a trusted third party? We never want the American Express cardholder file. We never want that name, address data. Comcast doesn't want to provide our name, address, subscriber to American Express. So how do we work with trusted third parties to de-identify and marry that, create that marriage? And we work largely with companies like Experian, Axiom, Allant, organizations that play that third-party blind matching agent. And in instances when we don't have customer data, we work with third-party analytic companies, third-party data providers. So in the case that we'll walk you through, we're going to talk a little bit about Volvo. These are a number of the attributes that we married to our subscriber file for a variety of segments. So in the United States, for car purchases, there are kind of a couple of data sets. There's Experian Automotive has looks at household level car registration data. Polk Automotive, same thing. How do we look at household level car registration data to know that a Volvo household's in the third year of a 3-year lease? So we have thousands of attributes that we marry to our subscriber file on a household basis that begins to get us out of the age-gender conversation and begin to think about target audiences more narrowly than traditional age-gender has afforded us. We were with a brand manager recently that said, hey, our target, we buy media on women 18 to 49. My wife's 48 and my daughter's 21, and I can't imagine two women more dissimilar than my wife and my daughter, but we approach the market in terms of buying our TV investment and treating those two individuals as the same. So how do we begin to introduce a layer of granularity beyond that age gender? And once we have that match file in place, the campaigns that we'll talk about here today are really designed to leverage addressability in the VOD environment. So when we talk about VOD, we have a pool of impressions across 40 or 50 cable networks, sort of the world-class content on the screen in front of you. And we also have the opportunity to ingest impressions from the broadcasters NBC and Fox, through our relationship with Freewheel and 4Fronts. So how do we look at C4 plus VOD inventory on cable networks and broadcast and tie that impression pool to a rich target audience, right? How do we begin to think about not everybody being a homogeneous group of equal prospects for the Volvo product portfolio? And once we do that, once we've done that match work, obviously on our part, we want to be able to tie ad exposure back to that subscriber file. So we know that the household is in the Volvo target audience. Now what we want to do is put a pixel, an invisible piece of code, if you will, a cookie, sort of akin to inside that Volvo 30-second creative that's running on VOD, cable inventory and broadcast inventory, C4 plus. In that universe, we want to put a pixel in that to know household level commercial ad exposure data. Do we know that that household was tuned to that message and the ability for us to pull that off of our set-top box and be able to link it back? We sort of describe this as a single source closed loop architecture where we're defining the target audience at a name address level, using rich data to create that definition, and then linking ad exposure back to that target audience. And then the final leg of that closed loop strategy is our ability then to link that ad exposure data back to post-campaign analytics. And when we look at ROI, obviously there are a number of measures that a brand might be interested in exploring performance beyond traditional cost per point or cost per thousand and media efficiency metrics. And you know, we've put a few on the slide, sort of working left to right. We may have a brand that is interested in sort of brand health attributes, purchase intent, brand awareness, message association. And so what we have the ability to do is to create sort of a pre-post test and control. So we know Volvo households that we're targeting pre-campaign. We create a Volvo cell that doesn't get exposed to the message pre-campaign. We run the advertising, and then we measure lift afterwards, comparing pre to post, test to control. And as I say, sort of brand tracking metrics can be one example that we look at on the left side of the page, working with analytic partners like Ipsos and other brand tracking, brand health studies, organizations focused in that arena. ComScore obviously is another example of a partner where we might want to look at the attribution level. Did American Express cardholders, when exposed to the ad, go online to apply for a card rate, a new card, or do they upgrade from a green card to a gold card going online? And the ability to tie online behavior back to TV ad exposure and what frequency level, what impression level was required to drive that movement from exposure on TV to action online. And then on the far right-hand side, which is really what Mike's going to talk about, is we think the best indicator of behavior is actual behavior, right? So anytime we can tie back to actual sales data at the household level and correlate that back to ad exposure, we think that's obviously the best indicator of performance measurement. But from our standpoint, we're very much data and analytic partner agnostic. Whatever the marketing objective is of the client, how do we begin to look at rich data, tie back ad exposure, link that ad exposure to performance in some measure, and really bring a level of accountability to the television world that historically has not existed previously. And we're very fortunate to have a wonderful partner with Group M and Mike with Modi's team specifically, and he's going to be kind enough to walk you through a couple, taking this theoretical and bring it into a practical, actual execution by walking through a couple of case studies that we've done together. So I'll turn it over to him.
What am I supposed to say now?
I don't know. You got it all. Let's go. They want to know the results.
So if it feels like we've been talking about this nonsense for a long time, we have. It's true. But over the past 12 months, more has changed in the television business as it relates to the application of data and technology than has over the past 10 years, right? In the United States alone right now, there's 43 million households, about 40%, that have the technology inside the box to insert a commercial to the individual level, right? That's a lot, right? It's one thing when we're talking about a couple 100,000 households or a couple of markets or one or two systems, but it's real now. And my job is to sit with all of our advertisers and help them think about how they're going to utilize this. And what that really boils down to is, who do you really want to reach? Nobody wants to reach everyone between the ages of adults of 18 and 49, at least not at the same frequency. So we sit down with the advertisers. Let me see this here for a second. We sit down with the advertisers and we help them think, who do they really want to target? People in the market to buy a car, people that have purchased soup, people that are not an existing customer, right? The lists are endless. And then we source the appropriate data source, match that against the long Excel spreadsheet of subscriber files that Andrew talked about, and then we send the commercials just to the households that we want, pay only for the delivery of those commercials to the homes that we want, tell the advertiser how many households saw the ad and how many households bought the car, bought the soup, or became a customer. This is happening now in the US at scale. I mean, so far this year, I've probably spent about $150 million US just on household level targeting. Well, that's small potatoes in the grand, $70 billion US TV market. It's a hell of a lot when it comes to targeting such small segments. Because at the end of the day, where advertisers really benefit from one-to-one messaging is when the size of your target audience is between 5 and 30% of the country or of the market. The cost of your product or service is higher than $5. And most importantly, we can determine how we're going to tie it back to sales. If we get those three things right, the target audience, the price of the product, and how we're going to measure it and tie it back to sales, this stuff always works. So what I'm going to show you now is something that we recently did with Volvo, right? We went down the list of every single competing automobile. We developed a list. I think there was about 12 of them. And we took a data source, in this case we used Experian Auto, matched against the subscriber files of Comcast system, and we determined of those 22 million households, how many of them were in the market to buy the car. And we executed the campaign accordingly. And what we found at the end of the campaign, when we matched back ad exposure to car sales, not only we were able to understand how many cars we sold and how much money we made, but which cars we actually sold based on which spot. And it wasn't just a blind process. We held back 5% of the targeted households, and we didn't send them the commercial. So that allowed us to actually distinguish the difference between what the addressable campaign contributed to sales versus all of the other noise in the marketplace. And we were even able to break it down to identify the appropriate frequency. When we went into this campaign, we had no idea what the right frequency was to someone that's been identified as a high-value customer or in the market to buy a car. And when we then cross-analyzed the sales by model at the frequency level in the individual household, we came up with what the optimal frequency was. So now, as we move forward, we know how to manage the campaign better, right? We know what our return on ad spend was. We know what the optimal frequency was. And this is not something you know in regular television. Like regular television in the US, right, we have a little bit of an issue, right? We ask 20,000 people what they watch. We assume the other 110 million watch the same. We buy networks and programs based on what those 20,000 people say they're watching, and we call it a day. And we know when the ads are on TV, we're selling soup, and when the ads are off TV, we're not selling as much soup. That's it. This allows us to do a little bit better. At the end of this Volvo campaign, we spent $430,000. 59 cars were sold based on this particular campaign alone, which translated into just under $1.7 million in sales. I had no idea whether that was really good or really bad, but when I sat down with the chief marketing officer at Volvo, her eyes popped out of her head and she was like, wow, this is the most efficient media execution that we've done all year, and she quadrupled the budget for 2016. So
We quadrupled the rates, I think.
yeah, that's unfortunately what happens. But at the end of the day, we were able to sit down with a major client, get them away from adults 25 to 54, get them thinking about who they really want to reach, identify these people, target them, and then track it back to sales. And that's a really, really, really cool thing to do in advertising. But it's not always all about cars, right? It's really, really easy to show a case study about an automobile, right? Particularly one that's $75,000 or $80,000. But we can also do it for pet food, shopping cart level data. That's all over the place. Companies like Shopcom and Catalina and dunnhumby, they track purchase behavior, right? That gets matched back to subscriber files, and we can determine how many of us bought pet food in the past 6 months, find those households, send them the commercial, and then tie it back to sales by a post-campaign match. I mean, this stuff is all here, it's now, it's real, and it's happening. I have 67 advertisers and about 150 campaigns that have run over the past 10 months purely at the household level. And it's simply, versus a fraction of that last year at this time. And that's simply because the mechanics finally came together to where there's scale. The data has finally become available to source the segments, and the advertisers have finally gotten through their heads that the spray and pray approach, although still very important and will never go away entirely, that there's more efficiencies to targeting than they actually realized. And to Andrew's point earlier, we're actually seeing digital dollars flow back into television because it can be targeted at a much more granular level. Now, this is as granular as it gets to the household level, but it can also be targeted to the zip code level. It can target it to a cluster of zip codes. Or we can basically take the same segments, people that have bought soup, and run a high index against national networks and programs and show the advertiser, here's how these networks and programs are delivering against these high value segments. So we're using this data and we're using this technology to feed the funnel at the top to help optimize the $70 billion by properly reallocating the inventory, all the way down to the bottom of the funnel, which is targeting households that are in the market to buy a car, that have purchased a competitor's soup, and wrap it up by telling the advertiser how many they actually sold. So that's the bulk of what we've been doing. But honestly, I mean, I have 30 people that work with me, and this is all we do every day. I mean, the demand is there for the advertisers, and the appetite for this on a global scale is definitely there. So the last thing I just want to leave you with is, what I said before, and that's despite the fact that we've been talking about this and beating this horse year after year. It's here, it's now, it's real, it's happening, and advertisers are spending money. Does anyone have any questions? I think we're about out of time.
Okay,
I think I just drank out of somebody's dirty glass. That's not good.
Right, we do have about 10 minutes for questions, so if you've got a question, put your hand up. Okay, there's a lady in the red there.
Hi, that was extremely interesting. I'm Shirley from Amdocs. I have a couple of follow-up questions. You mentioned that the spend, or that you had a spend of $150 million in addressable this year. So I guess the question is, what is it expected to be in 2016? And where do you expect it to be in 3 to 5 years?
So I believe that my addressable ad spend will triple in 2016. And that's just coming out of one small little New York agency, right?
Small.
Once everyone starts to realize what, the value in this, I think we could see that quadruple again. The 5-year question's a little bit harder because that depends on...
It goes back to the potential of addressable advertising out of the entire pie.
Yeah, it goes back to two things. It goes back to, can we go beyond the 42 million? And can we go beyond the local 2 minutes per hour of inventory that's currently addressable right now, which is owned by the systems? I mean, the cable guys spent the money on the technology to make the boxes smart, to enable them to deliver ads this way, and that's the logical place to start. But once we can get that national ad to become addressable using the same technology and in a fashion where you don't need a specialized group of people to do it, that's when it really takes off. Is that 5 years? I think so, but I don't think it's much before.
And one last small question. The CPMs for this kind of advertising, you mentioned, I understand from what you were saying, it's done mostly on the 2-minute local inventory, which typically have a much lower CPM than the national inventory. Where does this bring the CPM up to?
So actually, it's at least in the U.S., it's kind of the reverse. The local CPMs are generally higher than the national CPMs on average, but I'll give you a range. CPMs for addressable television are based purely on the size of the segment. The smaller the segment, the higher the price. I've paid as low of a CPM as probably $20 and as high of a CPM as $250. So there's a huge range. When Audi gives me a list of 1,500 people that are in the market to buy a $200,000 A8, and I can target 150 of them, $300 is a drop in the bucket.
Another element that we didn't really chat about much here is, I think Mike did a great job of describing the Venn diagram of success of a well-crafted target, right? A well-defined target, and a clear measurement of success. What is that? What is it that ROI performance measure we're looking at? A piece that we didn't really talk about is creative, right? So we think that you can have, we sort of joke around it, people say, hey, I want all this rich attribution of targeting. I want to go Asian ancestry, kids 2 to 11, own a shotgun, convicted felon, and been on a Disney trip and buy soup. And we said, well, there are 3 of those people, right?
People belong in jail.
Yeah. Well, we're working on that. It'll be probably cheaper just to drive to their home and give them the product. And then they'll say, well, but my spot's built for women 25 to 54. So I think as the business matures, how we begin to align creative with that well-crafted target and with that well-designed performance measurement, the more overlap of those 3 sort of concentric circles, the more success we see.
Okay, question there?
Are there not some risks attached to dynamically inserted advertising in the sense that your ROI becomes very, very clear and that a lot of advertising might move to another vehicle or another medium, like the Volvo campaign? You can attribute 59 additional sales or additional cars to 450,000 advertising spend. The margin on a car is not such that, what is the margin? The contribution margin on a car is 20%, so $1.5 million, 20% is 300,000 versus additional revenue versus 450,000 additional advertising spend.
So right now,
there is a risk involved in measuring very clearly the ROI.
the risk is the advertiser realizing how much money they've been wasting over the past 30 years. That's the risk. And they're still wasting. And what they don't like the most, to be honest with you, is by default, running one of these campaigns exposes the waste and exposes how much you're really paying. These clients think they're paying a $19 cost per thousand to reach adults 18 to 49, and they may be, but if they're only really looking to reach a portion of those, which most of them are, that $14 is really $150. That's the part that they don't like, and then they get embarrassed, and then they run away, and then they're afraid to try these things because they don't like what they see. And we've been facing that for the past couple of years, but you're 100% right. Yeah, it could, but what we're finding is the better we accurately measure the effectiveness of this, and the smarter we apply it as part of the overall mix, not just in a funnel, the more we reduce the risk of any negative impact. I mean, we've had very few advertisers that have done this that haven't come back and done it again. The question is, it's still 1%, 2%, 3% of their overall budget.
And I think a couple other things, a couple slides that have come up over the last couple of days that resonated. If you look at ad spend, right, in the US and UK, Europe, fairly tightly correlated to GDP, right? It doesn't go up or down. It's pretty much of a flat line. And if you look in the States, if you look at the sort of forecast of the growth of digital video in the next decade, depending on who you talk to, it's growing to a $15, $20 billion business, right? So as one of the gentlemen this morning talked about, that business has really, to date, come on the backs of print and digital, print and radio, really hasn't gone after TV budgets. So we think on the TV side of the table, if we don't go in the direction of providing a level of performance and accountability, those dollars are going to come on the backs, direct backs of television budgets.
Okay, both of you, can you just 1 minute only each, just tell us what your advice would be for European agencies or media planners who want to harness this, given that the differences between Europe and America?
You're on the agency side.
Sure. I mean, we're doing it now. I mean, Group M's a global agency, and so are all of our competitors. And you know, the technology, the data, the process is different in every market. But it's starting to happen here with Sky's platform, and you know, we're starting to see it happen in every other market to some extent. It's a long process.
Okay, but is there a single piece of advice in terms of what they should do first if they want to harness this for the first time as a buyer?
Think about who you really want to reach. That's the hardest part, is getting these clients to get away from these broad demographics because they've been doing it for 30 years.
Okay. Right, well, we're going to have our panel now.